Welcome to Paradigm Shifts with your host, Keisha Kruger. As an organization development practitioner and executive coach, I work with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. And here, we're on a mission to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. So, let's unpack light bulb moments for paradigm shifts within your workplace and beyond. Are you ready for a shift? Let's dive in. Welcome to our final episode of Season 2 on Paradigm Shifts podcast. We're excited to welcome Dr. John Bennett, a scholar practitioner with nearly 30 years of experience in business, behavioral science, and leadership. He is a business and behavioral science professor at the McColl School of Business, Queen's University of Charlotte. He is also founder and president of Lawton Associates, a consulting and executive coaching firm. As an executive coach and consultant, John has helped individuals and organizations excel through change since 1997. He is the author or co-author of numerous articles and 5 books, including Coaching for Change. John earned an MPA from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and an MA and PhD in Human and Organizational Systems from Fielding Graduate University. He also earned the Professional Certified Coach, PCC, credential through the International Coach Federation, ICF, and Board Certified Coach, BCC, credential. For more information about Dr. Bennett, including a link to his newest book, The Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change, available on Amazon, check out the show notes. Hello, John. Welcome to the second episode of Paradigm Shifts podcast. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for allowing me and inviting me and encouraging the work that I've been doing. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. And your book on the Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change is a lot of the discussions that we're going to have today and what it will be central to our conversations. But I'm curious to just kind of get us started with this really simple question. What has been your journey to coaching?
Well, it's a long journey, so I'll try to keep it short, brief in terms of my description. I started really understanding what coaching was when I was working with a consulting client, and this was a Y2K project. So this goes back to 1999, and I was working with this client system and working with the lead of that. And I had a conversation with a college classmate of mine, just a random conversation. What are you catching up? And she said, well, you're coaching. And I said, what is that? And I said, well, here's what I'm doing. And she said, yeah, that's coaching. So I started looking at what coaching was and where it was. And in 1999, the organization that we now know as the International Coaching Federation was fairly early. There were some proprietary coaching programs, training programs. I ended up that project, and then I enrolled in one of those and got some formal training, and I would say training, not education in coaching. And in that process, I really became more and more curious about what coaching was and how I could use it in my practice. Then I began to also realize that what I had been doing as an executive with the Red Cross for 18 years, a lot of my work there was coaching. We didn't have a label for it. Trying to help people be their very best. And so over this last 25 years, I have done a lot of coaching. I have also gotten to the point where I'm working on things like the book and helping others to understand coaching. And I've also been able to teach coaching, both training programs as well as graduate education programs. And so for me, there's this practice that I have that's developed, and a lot of the learning about some of the research I've done, the writing I've done, and the teaching I've done all come together to give me what I have and what I have to offer, and also the curiosity to continue learning.
That's right. And I was actually in one of your coaching classes when I was obtaining my coaching certificate from Queen's University of Charlotte. And I remember that class, it was very fondly. And it's also fascinating to hear that you kind of just stumbled upon coaching in this way, where it's like you already were doing it naturally, organically, as part of like who you were and how you were showing up in the workplace, helping others.
and then formally kind of finding that quote unquote label for it. So I'm curious, after you've gotten to where you are today within that journey, what prompted you to then write this book, this new book, The Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change?
Yeah. I want to talk about the book. I want to pick up on something, though, that you said, and that is that natural tendency. And I find so often people have that natural tendency, but they don't know what to call it.
Mm.
And a question that often comes up is, can you create a coach, or are they made, or are they born? And I would say it's a combination. And certainly we have some natural curiosities, and that gives us the opportunity to ask questions and help to really pay attention to what others are saying. And then the other part of that is we can teach skills, we can teach processes, and I think anybody can learn to coach anybody if you really want to. So
I think that's going to be a relief and reassuring to those who are maybe in the balance, kind of just trying to figure out, is this something that I can learn, or is it something I have to come naturally with? And I think that's nice to hear that it can be, those skills can be learned, and those skills can be built and developed over time.
yeah, yeah. And you ask about the book, Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change. It's released in 2024 here, and it's been a journey to write that book. I actually wanted to write that book almost immediately after we finished the Coaching for Change, which I co-authored with Mary Wayne Bush, and that book came out in 2014. And so I've had this idea of, we really needed to create something that was more approachable for the manager, the people leader, the person who is working in an organization that doesn't have time for a lot of depth of study, and probably doesn't need to understand a whole lot of the theory behind coaching, but something that was much more practical. And over these last 25 years, I've spoken about coaching, and I've taught thousands of people, literally thousands of people, coaching skills. This book came from this experience of teaching people coaching and realizing how managers and people leaders, those who are on the front lines every day of helping people to be their very best, to produce the kind of results that organizations need them to produce, that they needed some tools. They needed some very practical ways of understanding how coaching could help them and then help the people that they're leading. And so this book is really the culmination of that. It is built on the research. It's built on the practice. It really is designed for practitioners, not for academics. And it was a joy to write. I was excited about it. And it does build on the earlier book, Coaching for Change, but again, is focused for managers and leaders, people.
Absolutely. I think it's really critical and helpful that you're able to kind of explain those differences. I know coaching is a term that's kind of broadly used. And when you get into like terminology and language, those things can be important for understanding what we're talking about, right? And operationally defining things. I'm just curious from your perspective, like what's the difference between, let's say, an executive coach versus like a manager as coach?
Yeah. So executive coaches are often employed outside of the organization. So they're people who coach often full-time or most of their time in work. When we say executive, we usually mean people who are leaders of leaders, at least, if not higher C-suite kinds of leaders. And so the executive coach is someone who generally does this as their job full-time. You can also have internal coaches, people who are skilled and professional coaches who are doing this work as part of an organization, but executive coaches are typically external. And manager coach is the person who is a people leader who is using coaching skills and a coaching mindset and a coaching process as they interact with the people that they're leading. And I say that interacting with as opposed to formally coaching. So the executive coach is probably going to have 6 to 12 month kind of formal engagement with someone. However, a manager coach is more likely to have that one-off conversation, or that every week or two that you're interacting in a one-on-one meeting with someone, or when that employee comes to them and says, I need help with something. So instead of giving them the answer, the coaching approach would say, how can you help them tap into what they already know or what they have access to so that they really build the capacity to solve issues on their own, to develop their own capabilities, to grow and learn, and to be even a more powerful member of the team that that person that's coaching them is leading. So this is about development, it's about growth, but it's a mindset and a skill set that those managers can use on a day-to-day basis in an informal way as maybe also in a formal way. Yeah.
Mm. That's super clear. And so what I'm hearing you say is tapping into the skill sets, the mindsets, the lens of a coach and applying that to the day-to-day interactions with your employees to create high performing teams and also to develop their potential and maximize their potential,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes. And I like to use optimally performing teams because I don't know that we can always be at a high performance. I think about my car has a speedometer that goes up to like 140 or something. I'll
Mm-hmm.
confess I did get it up to 110 one time. I was in the Mojave Desert. But I know that car won't sustain that speed. And so what we're trying to do, I think, with every employee and with every team is to get the right amount of effort in the right way at the right time so that we're able to solve the issues that are facing the business and to develop that capacity.
Mm. And in your book, you emphasize this transformative power that coaching as a manager or managerial coaching has in both driving individual but also organizational change. And I'm curious if you can elaborate on how managers can leverage coaching to not only improve performance, but also facilitate deep, lasting transformation within those teams.
Yeah. Well, I think of coaching as serving one of three or maybe even more than just one of the following three things. So we can coach someone to develop their capabilities. So that's growing their skill set, growing their capacity to do things. The second area is that we can coach to help someone improve their performance. So they have the knowledge and the ability to do something, but they're just not leveraging that to its full capacity. So that's developmental and then performance. And then the third area that we can coach someone is on what we call transformational coaching. And we think about transformation maybe in a little different way than some people might think of it. We often think of transformation as that life-changing experience, the ones that big shifts. And we have some of those in our lives, and that certainly is transformational. But what I'm thinking about is those pivot points, those kinds of life events, those turning points, if you will, where we're shifting perhaps from one role to another, from one team to another, from one organization to another, or maybe even one life stage to another. Someone who's entering their working career or someone who is exiting their working career. Or it may be just some other kind of big experience. It could be even adjusting to a new manager, where that's a transformation for the individual. And when we think about transformation, I think of it as not something that we revert back in an old set of behaviors, but we're really moving forward to have lasting change.
Mm. That is makes it really, really structured and succinct to think about when I'm a manager listening to this, how I can apply coaching conversations in kind of those three areas or three buckets. But I also hear managers say, well, what's a good coaching model or framework that could be leveraged that would help them coach? And your book outlines several coaching models and frameworks, such as the change coaching model. Curious if you can share a little bit more about that, but also if you could share some real world examples of how managers have applied these models effectively and supported maybe organizational changes or continuous improvements.
Yeah. Well, in the book, I outline, and it's an iteration of what we had in the Coaching for Change book, and it's a 6-step process. And it's a simple process, and it's a guide. I think of it as the GPS. It's the roadmap, if you will, for a conversation, and it's a dynamic process. And it starts with asking the person or working with the person that you're coaching to find out what's going on for them. I'm a believer that meaning is made in context. And so if we want to help somebody, we've got to understand their context. So what's going on for them? Maybe what's happened since the last time you met with them? What are they struggling with? Then we help them to define what their coaching goal is for this conversation. And you'll notice there, I'm saying that they define that, not the person that's the manager. This is a shift for managers, I think, so often. I hear people saying, yeah, but I got to tell them what to do. Well, then you're not coaching them. Or I've got to ask them a bunch of questions to get to where I want them to land. That's not coaching. I call that coaxing. Coaxing,
Yeah.
not coaching. And so in this 6-step process, what the manager would do would be to say, what do you want to work on? What is important for you in this conversation? Or to use the baseball image, what would a home run look like at the end of this conversation? How would you know that we've achieved that goal? Then the manager asks questions and guides them through a process of discovery. So what is the information they already have? What kind of information do they need to have to address that goal? What have they tried, perhaps, or where have they seen other people try certain things to achieve the kind of result they're looking for? That's an information gathering step. Then the next step is one where the manager coach helps the individual to identify possible actions. And this step is important because so often managers want to give the answer. You know a lot, but the more you give the answer, you're not teaching them how to find their own answers. And so in this model, what we're really pushing is help the person facilitate their discovery. What could they do? And this is about possibilities. Then from there, the manager coach asks that team member to define what they want to do. What is the commitment for action? And they create an action plan. And I think of an action plan in this context is, what will you do, by when, for what outcome, and with what support? And notice I said support versus saying, what does that manager need to do? It may be the support they need is from the manager, but let's not put the manager in the middle of their work. So don't create that dependence. And then the last step of this, the 6th step, is where the manager coach asks the person that they're coaching simply to recast what they've gotten from the conversation, perhaps some insights, some ahas, some awareness, and then what commitments for action they're making. Really help them to solidify this is a conversation for action that's based on discovery in service of that team member's needs and goals. So that's that 6-step process. So I can give you some examples of that, but let me pause here, and maybe you've got a thought about that 6-step process.
Yeah, I love the idea of going into the conversation with context. I think that's really helpful for gathering information and setting the whole conversation up for success, and really leads well into asking your employee what success looks like in that conversation, and then going into like the meat of the coaching conversation. And all of this really, to me, comes back to taking not creating dependency on the manager, and to your point, building those critical thinking, independent thinking skill sets. And where the manager might have the most like impulses around providing answers, providing responses, providing solutions. And I'm curious if you have like a helpful tip for managers on how they can get in the right mindset for this type of conversation, which is vastly different from the other functions of their role, like managing, guiding, correcting, those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, I think of it this way, is that if we think of a continuum of an individual who's on your team that is new to the role, and so they do need direction. They need to be taught in some cases, and they need a lot of feedback, but they also can use coaching. The person who is well-skilled, seasoned employee, high performer, they don't need the direction as much. They need more support. They need the encouragement. They need feedback, and they can still use coaching. And then there's the person who, let's hope we don't have many of them, but I find that most organizations will tell me that we've got 10 or 15% of employees who are underperforming in some fashion or form. And we hope to develop them in a way that they become high performers, but in some cases they don't, and they need to exit the organization. That group they need to be taught, they need to be directed, they need feedback, they need coaching, but they also need to be managed. And I think one of the challenges that managers have is not differentiating their employees along that kind of continuum. And then when we do that, then we're able to begin saying, what does this employee need? How do I need to show up with them? What can I bring to that table? And the tendency I find is that we don't differentiate. And so what happens is managers continue to try to teach and direct the employee who really can operate more independently, which then diminishes their engagement, and it disempowers them. So we need to find the right solution. And often managers, of course, have this wealth of knowledge, and the tendency is that we want to be, you may have heard this phrase, we want to be the sage on the stage. And what I'm suggesting is to be the guide on the side. In other words, that's kind of a cliche term, but I think it sends a powerful message when we think about how do we help the employee that we're developing and we're having them perform well. How do we trust them? But then how do we also give them what they need when they can't perform to the level we need them to, or they need to grow and move on to a new role or responsibility?
Absolutely. And I feel like effective leadership requires trust and trust in your employees. You hire them for a reason. So why not apply some of these coaching tactics to ask your employees what they need? What are their current needs? Do you need coaching? Do you need more feedback? Do you need more direction right now? Also, giving it back to them to kind of ask for what they need and encourage that as well.
Yeah, I recently had one of the people that I'm coaching as their executive coach is a leader in an organization and had gotten a mid-year review for the first time with a new manager that they have. And this person, they had a misconnect on what that meant. And so we spent some time just working through how could they go back to their manager in order to have the conversation that they need to have to get what they need from that mid-year review, and to make sure that they're communicating to their manager that they understand the feedback that's been given. And that just sounds so simple, but it's the kind of thing, if you're not paying attention to the employee, you're not going to tailor your approach. You're not going to test for understanding, and you might not be developing that talent on your team.
And it's not a one size fits all approach. Leadership is not. So what are some real world examples of how managers have applied this model, for example?
Yeah. So one of the things that I include in the book is some interviews I did with people leaders, some from executives who are using a coaching approach in their day-to-day interaction. And there's several examples. I'll just share a couple of them with you. One is a team member this person was coaching who was trying to find their voice, find how to show up, how they can use their knowledge, their wisdom in an appropriate way through their role on the teams that they're a part of. And this leader that was coaching them told the story about how they had met with this person and they had observed them in meetings. And so they knew what this challenge was. So first off, they were able to give some feedback. And I think one of the keys here is that for leaders to be effective at coaching, they also need to know how to give feedback. And that's often the entry point for a coaching conversation is feedback. So in this case, they were able to share their observations about how this person could perhaps use their voice in a new or different way. But instead of telling that person what to do, they helped them to see what it would look like, to create the image of how they would appear, how they would act, what they would do, what they wouldn't do, if they were fully using their full potential, finding their voice, and being able to share in an appropriate way to have the influence and the impact that that employee needed to have. And so they used a coaching approach, and instead of telling the person, they really helped that individual team member to find their own answers and develop some action plans. And then they were able to give them feedback as they observed it, and they were actually then able to also help that team member to reflect on the experiments, the trials that they had, the pilots that they were running, to try on some new behaviors, to learn from those experiences. Yeah.
I love that example. And I think what's really cool about that, whether that manager intended to do it or not, is it really helps the employee utilize like a neuropsychological technique, mental rehearsing, and really helps an individual kind of envision what that future state might look like to bring it closer to them and start kind of practicing. And some of the most successful athletes, performers, they utilize this technique to talk through and kind of get to that ideal state that they want to get to. And having a manager leverage that skill with a coaching approach is just genius. I love that.
Yes. Give me one more example. I think that this is an interesting one that we can probably all relate to. Is one of the individuals that I interviewed for the book happened to be the chief performance officer for a school district, very large school district. And she told the story of working with a teacher who was an art teacher. And the art teacher was kind of struggling with the role of the balance between being an artist and being a teacher. And I think so often, particularly as people move up their careers, what got as Goldsmith wrote in his book, Marshall Goldsmith, his title of his book, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." The same thing is true as we think about our kind of career progression. Is that so often that skill that we have a lot of interest in, the things that we've done and gotten rewarded for, don't always serve us well when we move into another role. Well, in this case, this teacher, this art teacher, was an incredible artist and had all kinds of talent and had passion and was accomplished in their artwork. But their ability to teach was not there. They really suffered. And you could tell, this person that I interviewed said, you could tell that they just lacked the passion and they weren't being effective and it wasn't rewarding for them. And so they had a conversation with this teacher and gave them direct feedback. You're an incredible artist, but you're not effective as a teacher. And that requires courage on the part of that manager to be able to call out that behavior and name it. And then what that happened then was it led to a coaching conversation where they were able to help that teacher realize, well, you're right. I'm not doing what I need to do. I'm not doing what I want to do. And then that helped them to create a transformational experience for that teacher where they made a different career choice. And they didn't have to fire the person. And the person they remained whole, and they were able to explore what they were really good at and develop that capacity.
That's such a powerful example. And I see some parallels between what happens in the workplace as well when it comes to an individual contributor, let's say, who is a superstar in their role and they're performing really well where they are. So they get hired to, take on more responsibility. The skill sets they, excelled in are not necessarily the ones that will keep them in thriving in that next level. And the Peter principle, developed by Lawrence Peter, observes that as well. If you perform well in your job, you're likely to be promoted to that next level in your organization, but that's not always an effective. So it sounds like a really crucial time for those who are either interested in moving up or advancing for coaching would be at that pivot point, a transformation type of coaching.
Yes.
And that could be really supportive for those who are looking to get to that next level. But also, if you're just looking to pivot into a new direction, you at least get feedback around whether that's something that stretch skill is something that you excel in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're reminding me. I've got a friend who he flies trapeze, and I've heard him talk about learning to fly trapeze. You know, swinging from one bar to another bar, 20 feet up in the air, or whatever, which is sounds really frightening to me, but also potentially exhilarating. And one of the things he talks about is when you do that, you cannot hold on to both bars at the same time.
Oh.
You've got to let go of one of the bars, and chances are there's a point where you're not holding on to either one. That's the frightening part about change. And a manager coach can help someone discover what they need to let go of, the one bar in the trapeze image, and what do they need to embrace in the new one. And that means sometimes letting go. I see this often in my executive coaching work is somebody gets elevated and they want to keep doing what they did in their other job. And what a manager coach can do is help that person realize, what does the new job require, and how do you find the interest and the passion and the reward from doing those new roles and let go of the old. And that's transformational.
That example, that story is going to stick with me forever. I think that's just such a really awesome way to envision and just visualize that letting go process and what it takes. Going back to the coach, the role of a manager as coach, one of the key themes in your book is the importance of managers really honing in and developing these coaching skills. And talk to us a little bit about what are some of those actual skills, and what are some of the practical steps and strategies that organizations can start doing to equip their managers with those skills?
Yeah. Well, in the book, I talk about 6 coaching skills. I'll mention 4 of them in particular because I think they're the core, if you will. One is that ability to, and I present these in a way that's different than I might if I were talking about executive coaching. And the reason for that is because, again, the manager is on the front line of every day, having the interaction with people and the rich environment of being able to give feedback. So feedback is the first skill that I talk about. And that's the entry point in many cases, where someone comes to you asking for feedback, or it's your opportunity to give them some feedback. And I don't subscribe to the notion of giving constructive feedback, because I think all feedback should be constructive. When somebody says, may I give you constructive feedback? My question back to them is, so are you also going to give me some destructive feedback? And that's not what they mean. So the idea of tailoring feedback to an individual's needs based on both reinforcing the things that need to be continued or grown, and those things that need to be changed. And I call that developmental feedback. So in the book, we talk about some of those techniques, and if we had a lot more time, we could talk about the detail of that. A second skill that's critical to coaching is the ability to listen. And I've asked people in seminars and in classes, how many of you have had a public speaking class? And most people will raise their hand. In some fashion or form, they've had a public speaking class. And then I'll ask, how many of you have had a private listening class? And no one raises their hand. Because what we do is we teach people to talk, but we don't teach them to listen. And one of the best gifts we can give someone is just to listen. Not to solve a problem, but to listen. And as a coach, as a manager who's coaching, it's critical that you listen, and you listen for understanding. What is the person saying behind what they're saying? What are they not talking about? What are the connections between what they're saying and what they're doing, or the disconnections? And helping them then to realize that. So that's a place where we can give some observation. Then the third skill is the skill of asking powerful questions. And as a coach, the coach shouldn't talk very much. Managers often will want to, again, want to instruct, when in fact what's needed is listening and asking a few very powerful questions. And I would recommend to managers who are coaching that you try to speak 20% or less of the time that you're engaging with that employee in a coaching conversation. That's a big stretch for most managers. So asking questions means we ask powerful ones, the ones that foster the relationship, but they also help the person move through that 6-step process that I outlined a few minutes ago. And then the fourth skill that I'll mention is reframing. And that's the ability to help someone see things from a new or different perspective. For example, it might be using a metaphor. I used one with the idea of or an analogy, or all of these or time stretching, just thinking, well, what would be possible if time were not an issue, or resources weren't an issue? What would you do? Or I like to think of it as if the magic question, if you woke up in the morning and the answer was solved, how would it have been solved? And getting people to think outside the box. And that's a powerful tool that managers can use. So those are some skills. Now, the other part of your question was, how can organizations develop these? I think the first part is that we have to create an environment where feedback is embraced, encouraged, sought after, and effectively provided. And if we create that culture, then that leads into the opportunity for people to have a growth mindset, that they're interested in developing themselves, they're developing for future, they're developing for the current job, whatever it might be, and they're trying to explore ways to get better. So that kind of curiosity and that growth mindset is critical to the culture, coupled with feedback. And then organizations can train people. Coach training for managers is a powerful tool to help people. I do a lot of this work in developing the capacity of managers to use the skills and the processes that we're talking about today. So all of these are the kinds of things. And then another one that I would offer here is helping people to be reflective. So often I hear in organizations, we're just in a go, go, go mode. And we're so focused on doing that we don't take time to process. I've been doing some work on mindfulness recently. And one of the things we know about mindfulness is it slows us down. And if we're in the doing mode, or if we're in the analytical mode, we can't be in the learning and reflective mode. Those modes are so important for building capability, for developing people, for recognizing and appreciating them for their talents, their gifts, and helping them to be the very best they can be.
I can really appreciate the 4 core skills that you mentioned, and it's validating to know that those skills are part of our manager framework for skills, our skills architecture, if you will. All of our managers are evaluated from a soft skill, people skill perspective on giving quality feedback, listening, asking powerful questions. And reframe is a really great tactic. I love that. And it's really important when an organization can foster that feedback culture, to your point, because then it's not necessarily a disruptive process to the day-to-day operations when a coaching conversation is needed, or when feedback is given, because it's something that's just expected, right? It is just a continuous part of how we operate, how we do things.
Yeah.
And in your book, The Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change, you talk about ethical considerations of managerial coaching. And I think it's important that we take a moment to talk about those. What are the key ethical dilemmas that manager coaches might face, since they are different kinds of conversations, and how can they navigate those challenges while maintaining trust and, of course, integrity within the teams?
Yeah. One thing before I jump to that you said that prompted a thought for me, and I'll get to the ethics question in a moment, is that people talk about how much time is this going to take as a manager. And I've experimented with this a bit, and what I've discovered is that you can have an effective coaching conversation in about 9 to 12 minutes. You don't have to have a long conversation. And when you develop these skills, it can be this kind of impromptu, informal conversation that perpetuates that person coming back to you, not when they just have problems, but when they're looking for discovery. And as Adam Grant talks about, I think it's in his book, Originals, is that we often set up the stage for people we say, don't come to me unless you have a solution, unless you have ideas. And I would say that if you're doing your job as a people leader, What you should be saying is, come to me when you have the problems you can't solve yourself, and let me help you figure out how to solve them, as opposed to come to me when you already have answers and I'll tell you which one to do, or when you don't have any and you want me to tell you what to do. Neither of those is going to develop the capability of the person. And so if we can have these kinds of short conversations that have a coaching approach, we'll continue to develop that relationship with the employee and help them resolve the sticky wickets, as we sometimes refer to them.
Absolutely. And going back to your thought around time as well, like it ends up saving you time in the long run, right?
Yeah. Because you build their capacity, they're going to be better employees, and they'll be able to bring you the bigger issues that you really need to deal with, and they'll learn and grow, and that will cascade throughout the organization. So, you ask about ethics. I think the manager coach has some specific kinds of potential ethical challenges in this relationship. One is that you've got a power differential to start with. If you're a manager of someone, they're looking to you as the power source, and you have that power. So using that wisely and not abusing it is one. Another could be not knowing what your own capabilities are as a manager coach. In other words, don't go too far out on a limb here. If you don't know how to do what you're being asked to do, refer them to someone else. Probably your human resources staff have some capabilities. That may be a situation where you do need an executive coach to come in and help someone, but know what your competence and your limitations are and function within that. Another is don't coach people without them knowing you're doing it, unless you really have developed this kind of way of being. Don't do it and say, kind of, gotcha, I coached, but to be upfront and say, would you like me to coach you? Would you like me to engage with me in that kind of conversation? Another is your own conflicts of interest. I think this is an important one to pay attention to, because as a leader, as a manager, you have your own career and aspirations, and being careful as you're engaging with someone else to realize what your interests are and what their interests are and what the organization's interests are. And they may be aligned or they may be misaligned, but if you can be upfront about that and be clear about that and be transparent about it, then you're able to work through those kinds of dilemmas. So those are a few of the ethical challenges that I think manager coaches may run into.
Yeah, and I think managers who do the work to be self-aware make great candidates who would make quality coaches. And I say that because it takes a lot of self-awareness to remove some of those personal projections that might happen within a coaching relationship. And to your point, not putting your interests into the agenda, putting the organization's interests into the agenda, and taking that guide approach on the side. So I appreciate just at least having some awareness around those ethical considerations. And then I want to talk to you about the importance of coaching across differences, because your book highlights that specifically culture and organizational context. So how can you provide insights on how managers can adapt their coaching approaches to be effective, let's say across diverse teams, but also varying cultures?
Yeah. You've mentioned teams, and I want to just not to let that drop, is that what we're talking about here can be applied to individuals as well as to teams as a whole. But we do have a much more diverse workforce and workplace than we've probably ever had. And that's likely to only increase. So realizing the differences that we have between each other, and that might be gender, it might be race, it might be sexual orientation, it might be political views, it might be a number of factors. And the more that a coach, and you mentioned this, can be self-aware about how those elements of who we are make us who we are, and being aware of that, and what does that then give us as a lens or as a perspective, as a mental model, if you will, about how we view the world. Then we're able to look at others and say, you have a view, you have a perspective, you have a experience, and it's similar to or different from my own. And then as a manager coach, how do we adapt so that I'm recognizing that you may process experiences in a very different way than I do? And how do I, as the manager, adapt myself to who you are? You know, that image that's used sometimes about a lighthouse and a ship kind of in this battle about who needs to move. Well, the lighthouse isn't going to move. So the ship doesn't move. And in this case, I think managers need to be the ones who are moving. We need to find ways to pay attention to how does someone else process the information or the experiences. And that could be also things like neurodiversity. There's a lot of discussion these days about just how we process information, whether we're verbal, whether we like written things, whether we like to see things, whatever it might be. And your view and my view might be different. I'll give you an example of that. Is that I have a tendency to process things and it shows up in my brain as an image. And so one of the ways that I test for understanding is I play back the image that's coming up in my brain. And for somebody who doesn't think in terms of images, I have to realize they might not get what I'm seeing. And so I need to make sure that I'm speaking their language, not only my language. And this is ways that we can adapt as manager coaches to be responsive and be respectful of the differences that exist in our teams.
If you ask powerful questions as a skill set, that's a great way to get to some of those answers, to find out and unveil some of those learning differences. We talk about it a lot in Ellen. How do people learn differently? But also it applies to all other areas of the workplace and domains outside of just learning.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a powerful conversation. I really, really enjoyed diving into coaching from a manager's perspective. It's so needed. It's very relevant. And the timing of this book could not be better. If anyone is interested in finding out more about the particular core skills, because he only gave us 4 out of 6, and some other examples around, how to navigate coaching in the workplace, be sure to check out the show notes to get the link to pre-order and order the book. I think it's past pre-order now, right?
September's it's being released. Yeah.
That's great. So they can get the book. You can learn more about how to connect with Dr. John Bennett in the show notes. That will be there. But definitely get yourself a copy of this book. His last book was amazing. And if you're a manager, a leader, this is going to definitely resonate with you. And before I let you go, I have one final question. And that is, what's the most recent paradigm shift you've experienced?
Recent paradigm shift. Well, as you know, I'm going through a little bit of a shift in terms of my own transformation, in terms of my working life, and what does that journey look like for me. And I've been doing a lot of work on reading on what does it mean to transition from full-time employment to part-time and moving into, I don't know if retirement is the right word for me. People who know me say I'll never retire. But a big shift for me, and the paradigm shift, is what does that mean in terms of my identity, how I use my time, who I interact with, what relationships do I have, and what do I want and need, and the basic question also of did I save enough? So all of these things become very personal questions that when I was in my 20s, I don't even think I had a thought about that stuff. And and now I do.
Oh, I love that paradigm shift, and I will enjoy, just kind of connecting with you after this and hearing how you explore and navigate that. Your response kind of prompted a question. Do coaches have coaches? Because it sounds like you could use a coach.
Well, they do. And I rely on some of my colleagues from time to time to do informal and more formal coaching. So absolutely, it's needed.
Yeah, learning never ends.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I hope this is helpful for your listeners, and certainly want to be a resource to you and to them. So thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to staying connected on multiple ways.
Awesome. Thank you.